Good morning, everyone. I'd like to especially welcome all those of you online, and thank you for coming in person to be with us today, all of you. I'm reading from Rays of the One Light. These are commentaries on the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita written by Swami Kriyananda and based on the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda. This week is entitled The Redeeming Light. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The people that walked in darkness have seen a great light, says the Bible in chapter 9 of the book of Isaiah. They that dwell in the land of the shadow of death, upon them hath the light shined. What is this light of which so many scriptures speak? In Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramhansa Yogananda, we read of an early experience the Master had with that light. I was blessed about the age of 8 with a wonderful healing through the photograph of Lahiri Mahashaya. This experience gave intensification to my divine love. While at our family estate in Ikanpur, Bengal, I was stricken with Asiatic cholera. My life was despaired of. The doctors could do nothing. At my bedside, Mother frantically motioned me to look at Lahiri Mahashaya's picture on the wall above my head. Bow to him mentally. She knew I was too feeble even to lift my hands in salutation. If you really show your devotion and inwardly kneel before him, your life will be spared. I gazed at his photograph and saw there a blinding light, enveloping my body and the entire room. My nausea and other uncontrollable symptoms disappeared. I was well. At once I felt strong enough to bend over and touch Mother's feet in appreciation of her immeasurable faith in her guru. Mother pressed her head repeatedly against the little picture. O omnipresent Master, she said, I thank thee that thy light hath healed my son. I realized that she too had witnessed the luminous blaze through which I had instantly recovered from a usually fatal disease. Where my light is, God once told a saint whom the divine light had healed, no darkness can dwell. The divine light, pure, calm, liberating, is the only final cure for every kind of delusion. Ill health, emotion. Uh-oh, we're in trouble. Oh, there, it came back. Want me to twist it? It's okay now. It's fine. Hold on. We have a brief message from our sponsor. You were right. No, I should have checked. So God's love and God's light is the cure for every, where are we? For every form of delusion, ill health, emotional grief, and spiritual ignorance. Seek it daily in the silence, in deep meditation. As the Bhagavad Gita says in the 5th chapter, for whom that darkness of the soul is chased by light, splendid and clear shines manifest the truth, as if a sun of wisdom sprang to shed its beams of light. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. We just had our annual gathering at Ananda Village, which has been called for over 50 years, Spiritual Renewal Week. And I know many of you watched it online. There were wonderful classes every day, a beautiful kirtan, a beautiful concert, other evening programs. It was a great gathering of energy. And one of the things that Jyotish said, he and Devi led the Kriya on Friday night, was very sweet and poignant and powerful all at the same time. He said, don't think that just these 300 people gathered to renew their Kriya vows was just there for themselves. We weren't there just for ourselves. That focus of energy, that synergy, the sum of which is greater than the individual parts, that synergy is a light that goes out into the world. And we have to remember that we practice Kriya, we practice our meditation techniques, not just for ourselves. We do, of course, for a little bit of peace of mind, a little bit of calmness, whatever grace we can draw, whatever guidance we can receive to help us in our lives. But it's not just for ourselves. It's to be a channel of God, of these masters. So we have to consciously remember to not think about ourselves. I love that Swami paired this redeeming light subject with non-attachment. Because the way that we become free is by letting go of ourselves, by letting God flow through us. And we have to think about what's for breakfast. You know, what do we need to do today to earn a living, to serve in some way? Because I remember before I got on the path, while I was still in college, I read some spiritual book, I don't remember, or perhaps someone said this to me, but it had authority, and I've always resonated with it and known it to be true. And it was simply, you will never be happy until you serve something greater than yourself. It's a revolutionary concept, and it's perfectly simple. The more we think about ourselves, how our meditations are not bringing us visions of angels, how, we're struggling with ill health or with finances or relationships or whatever it is, the more we think about that, the smaller we become. The more engrossed is the bee of our minds on our own lives, the more contracted we are. And contraction is tension of heart. We need to let ourselves go. Let non-attachment be even to our own personalities. Swami was vilified in lawsuits there towards the end of his life with another organization that we won't name at the moment, but it was painful for him. It was very, very painful. And they had high-powered lawyers that would put a camera right in his face, try to discourage him, try to put him off his game, try to torture him, basically. And they said awful things about him. And I remember he was so tired and weak from fighting this awful battle. And he said to me once, sort of, am I really such a bad person? Is my personality so awful? And I said, Swami, you have the personality of someone who's trying to get rid of personality. And that's the truth. We have to rise above this little self. Get rid of it. The more I think of all the aspects of my personality, it's like, I'm bored with that. Who needs it? Instead, make yourself a channel of divine love, of divine joy. We have the blessing of having had many, what would you call them? I guess assignments in the almost 50 years that we've been part of Ananda. And so we've been posted to Seattle and Palo Alto and Ocean Song, which was a community that didn't quite make it, but it was very strong for a while. And Italy and India. We've just been in many, many places. And then we've also traveled a lot to other countries, Singapore and Canada and Germany and England and Russia and all these different places. So my point is that we have met a lot of people. And when you meet people, you have a first impression, but not much. And so all you can do in that moment is try to love them. Wherever they are, whoever they are, whatever they've been, you just try to give them Master's vibration. And then the interesting part that I've found is that after a while, your memories of them collect. And you start thinking about them in certain ways. You start categorizing them and judging. And that's where the pain comes in. Never do that. Swami was in Assisi visiting the Porziuncola, tiny little chapel, not much bigger than this dais, that St. Francis built. When he and the monks, the first 10 or 12 monks who came to him, they just had little mud huts out in the field, and he built this little chapel. It's gotten a lot more elaborate since his time, but it still has his vibrations. And Swami was sitting there one day meditating, and he felt this overwhelming sweetness of St. Francis's vibration come into his heart. And he prayed, how can this sweetness even exist? It's so thrilling. How did you get this sweetness? And the answer came from, he felt from St. Francis saying, by loving your brothers and sisters equally and by never judging. And that's the most important thing, never judging. So people slap you in the face, or they trip you up, or they are mean, or yell at you, or whatever it is. It's blatant. What do? Let it wash over you. Just go. Doesn't mean anything. Stand before it in love and blessing. There was a particular story that Sai Ganesh gave at I guess it was the Saturday talks, and it was just so sweet to me. He was talking about how Divine Mother, most of all, wants our wounds. And he was sweetly talking about cats, because he has two, he called them fur babies. And he said, if they're ever injured, they never want to show you their wound. Sorry. I think. Anyway, the cats will never come up and say, look, I got bitten. They won't do that. But that's what Divine Mother wants from us more than anything. She wants us to show us those parts of ourselves that are wounded, that are hurt. And she wants us to give those to her, because that's the essence of what is holding us back. So the more that we can open to Divine Mother and give her all the hidden, dark, wounded places of our psyche, the more she can come in with her healing love. So I especially love this reading, the part in the Bhagavad Gita in which Krishna is saying, those who are chased by light. We have to remember that our lives are not just mundane, random actions, things that happen, failures, triumphs, situations, confusions, all of that. It's not random. We are being chased by light. Everything that happens to us, everything that we suffer from, every boredom that we try to endure, every person that comes to us, everything is orchestrated by God, by that light that is chasing us. God wants nothing from us except our love. And He has created us for the express purpose of finding that love. It's as though He created souls, He created all of us and gave us a little drop of consciousness and said, grow that consciousness until finally you can realize that you are just a part of me, that we are one in that bliss. And so think of yourself just as that little plant growing in consciousness, and don't be afraid to show God all your deepest, darkest pain your aspirations, everything. Spoiler alert, he knows already. So it's not like it's any surprise, because he is already there. That's the other thing that's important to remember. We are not alone in this battle to find peace, to find bliss. We are not alone. God is always just behind our thoughts, just behind our feelings, just behind the darkness of closed eyes. Our job is to become so still and so open and so full of love for God, longing for God, that we finally see behind that darkness and we see that redeeming light that is always there.
Nirmala telling a little bit about the Portiuncula reminds me of some stories about it also that are fun, and how relevant they are to the topic of the redeeming light remains to be seen, but I thought I'd just share a couple of them. We both lived there in Assisi, and at different times, but in the late 1980s, and we had to, because we lived outside of Assisi in a tiny, we weren't even really in a town, we were basically just on a road that connected two little towns. We had to come to Assisi to do errands and, do things like buy plumbing parts, which happened to fall to me to fix different plumbing problems that happened, because we had old buildings, and which meant old plumbing that didn't always work very well. And in the course of doing errands in Assisi, there were a couple of immutable laws that had to be followed. One of them is that you really had to get off the mark in the morning. Nirmala talking about being chased by the light, it made me think, if you're going to outrun the light, you better be quick on your pins. I mean, you got to run really fast to beat the speed of light. That's like tough to do. Okay, but anyway, get off the mark in Assisi, because if you didn't get into town soon enough to do your errands, now I'm granted, stores didn't open at 7 o'clock in the morning in Assisi. I mean, they generally opened at 10, but there were a few that opened a little earlier, and if you caught those early enough and you got the ones that opened at 10, and you had your 3 or 4 or 5 errands to do, you could pack them in and you could get them done before lunch. But if you miss, if you didn't get the last one done before lunch, trouble, because there's the sacred event that happens, which is the siesta. And nobody messes with the siesta. Everything closes except a few restaurants, but basically you're just out of luck for about 3 hours until they open up. So you just be stuck waiting. Well, we had a rhythm. And part of that rhythm was you come to town, because a lot of the places where you would do the errands were down the hill from Assisi in the area where this Portiuncula is, in Santa Maria degli Angeli. It's a beautiful name. These Italian names. It's like there's a rule of Italian, which is that if it doesn't sound beautiful, it cannot be correct. It's got to sound beautiful. So Santa Maria degli Angeli, just music. Anyway, because the errands happened, a lot of them in that area, two things would happen in conjunction with those errands. One of them was we would stop in at the Portiuncula and we would say our prayers. And we would put our hands on the walls that these monks built, and St. Francis himself built, and right where they prayed. And I tell you, it was like plugging your phone into the charger. It was just like put your hands on the wall, put your head on the wall. I mean, whatever you have to do, just get there, get connected. And the second little ritual was we stopped at the coffee bar and we had a coffee. And they are both spiritual experiences in Italy. And whether one or the other is more important, you have to judge for yourself. They're both relevant, they both work. They both energize. But what struck me is that light and being chased by the light, we can tend to think, and this, it's interesting, the Bhagavad Gita quote, for those who are chased by the darkness is chased by the light, shines this light of wisdom, this brilliant sun of wisdom. Well, there's a little subtext there that's implied but not stated in the reading, which is how do you get chased by the light, or how does that darkness get banished? Well, it gets banished by looking at the light, by receiving the light, by offering ourselves into the light. And that isn't automatic, because Divine Mother doesn't come and cloud us over the head and say, open your eyes, look at the light. We have to want to do it. And it's, as Nirmala was saying and was implying, it isn't always desirable, because sometimes, have you ever had your room be a mess? Has anybody ever dealt with a garage that's a mess, an attic that's a mess, a basement, a closet, a kitchen, you fill in the blank, accounts that are a mess. I'm looking at Chris Wall here, one of our accountants. Stuff happens, things get messy. And we don't always want the light of day. I got to tell you a funny story. I lived in Seattle. Before there was a community in Seattle, Ananda, Seattle, there was an ashram in Seattle, and I stayed in that ashram. It was just kind of a big barn of a house that had a whole bunch of bedrooms and several bathrooms. And we didn't have regular group meals, but we sort of had some, and we would all end up in the kitchen together at various times. Well, one of these times we were sitting at the table, and somehow the topic of the messy room came up. And the lady across the table from me, Nayaswami Susan McGinnis, was saying, well, her room was definitely the messiest. And I said, I don't know about that. It's pretty bad. Mine's pretty bad right now. She said, all right, well, let's do a test. And we'll both go, and nobody can go anywhere. You have to just go right now. So we went to my room, we went to her room, and the messiest room was the one that won. Well, I had to admit hers was messier than mine, so she won. Okay, mine was pretty bad, but it wasn't quite as bad as hers. But we don't always want, it's uncomfortable to go into a messy room and for someone else to see it. It's kind of like, whoa, I don't really want you to look at that. Well, we're like that, the little kitty that doesn't, that hides the hurt paw or the injury of whatever. I had a friend at Ananda who was ill with cancer. Whether he knew or whether he didn't know, I don't know. He went on hospice like 2 days before he left the body. And he was very scorpionic, very, very private. And he did not want anyone to know. If he knew, maybe he didn't even know himself. I don't know. So, there is this tendency to want to just keep it to ourselves. But at some point, we have to just fling the shutters open, fling the doors open, step out into the light and say, shine on me. Fill me with that light. This week I gave a talk on chanting. The theme of Spiritual Renewal Week was how to fight the battle of life and how to win. And so the different days each had individual topics, and I spoke on Friday among a group of other speakers, and the topic on Friday was spiritual practices to fight the battle. And I thought, chanting is half the battle is one of the things that Yogananda said, and that theme hadn't been picked up earlier in the week. I was deathly afraid that Sagar, the guy who spoke before me, was going to claim that topic, and then it was going to have to be spontaneous, audible on the line of scrimmage Plan B, which fortunately didn't happen. He sort of lightly alluded to it, but he didn't dive into it. But one of the things that I did not say on Friday, I was talking about chanting, and I was talking about how, if I asked a show of hands, who thinks I am not a musician? Probably a whole mess of hands would go up. Oh, I can't sing. Oh, I can't play anything. I can't even play the drum on the table. I mean, it's like just people just feel very shy about their lack of musical ability. Well, here's this. So I did say this much. Everyone, every single person who has a beating heart, if your heart is beating, you are a musician. Because you are a musician of your life in your heart. And however that plays out beyond, whether you ever sat down at the piano or whether you've ever vocalized anything, okay, that's all icing on the cake. But everyone is a musician inside. And if you can mouth the words, repeat the words mentally to a chant, that alone is a beginning. Now here's the part that I didn't say, and that I meant to say, but you start going down the ski slope and you can't hike back up and take a different path. It's like you just have to go with the flow that you get, and I was running out of time, and Asha was the next speaker, and you just, there's a law of the universe that says you don't mess with Asha's time. It's like you don't just claim 5 minutes of Asha's time. You just end when you're supposed to end. But the part that I didn't say is that we think of chanting as only, like we did this morning, it only is typically connected with right before we sit to meditate. Because, of course, it's a wonderful preparation. Part of the reason chanting is half the battle is it prepares us to meditate. Okay, that's totally valid and that's fabulous. But it doesn't end there. Chanting is 24/7. There comes a point where you become the chant. It's not about words. It's not about melody. Those things are where you start. The melody is the aspiration of the chant. So the melody and the words are what make it stick to us. It makes it, glom onto. Swami used the colorful image of burrs. I was out there weed whacking over the weekend, and you start cutting weeds and grass, you're going to get burrs everywhere. It's, they stick to you just like you take 10 minutes trying to pick them out of your clothes and your hair and whatever. That kind of stuff gets washed away by chanting. And there comes a point where all of that aspiration is distilled into a call. And in the Festival of Light, Swami says, from sun and moon and all the stars, and ... and from the hearts of mankind and of creatures everywhere goes up in wordless yearning a prayer for redemption. That's the call that our hearts are offering. But if we're focused on something else, we don't know it. We're not aware of it. We're not looking at the light. We're looking at whatever version of darkness there happens to be in this world. And we tend to, whatever we look at, whatever we focus on, tends to be what we identify with. So we start thinking, oh, well, then that's what I am too. I'm that. One of the great beauties of going to a week like Spiritual Renewal Week is that we're around enough people, there is enough collective magnetism, that you start to say to yourself, oh, well, if all of these people can do this, I can too. We are all of us that light. We may not know it yet. We may have forgotten it. One of the beautiful things about this affirmation, non-attachment, is when we perfect, non-attachment is one of the yamas. Non-attachment to the body, non-attachment to the things that by right seem like they should be ours. But even our bodies they don't really belong to us. We're given them to use for a time. When we perfect that, what is the boon? What is the blessing that comes to us? We remember our past lives. We remember all of the bodies that we've inhabited before, all of the lives that we've shared, all the dreams, all the aspirations, all of that. We remember it all. And why is that held from us before we've perfected non-attachment? Because it's on a need-to-know basis. And we don't need to know all that. What if you had wedding pictures, baby pictures from 10,000 lifetimes? You think wedding is a happy day, babies are a happy day, it's like all cool things. But it's like, what would you do with all that? It's too much. It's too much to take in. It's not relevant unless and until we are not attached to this life. And we say, just as what Nirmala was saying, we say, Divine Mother, I'm your channel. Help me to love, help me to be an instrument for light. And then that light, I mentioned in the fire ceremony, I had to look up the word redeem because I knew it wasn't a coupon. We're not cashing in something here. That's not the definition of redeeming we're talking about. Redeeming means to prevent error, to prevent a mistake. It means to have the light shining bright enough that we see where we're going. We see the implication. Oh, if I go that way, not good, not a good plan. We see where is truth. And we can follow it, and we can live it, and we can become it. And let us invite that light into our lives and into our hearts, and then let's try to help share it with all the world.